social fabric, especially for the people and places where those things are weakest. And I'm delighted to welcome you all today to the final instalment, and in some ways the jewel in the crown of our Level Up series of events, which in the 3 months since the budget has brought together policymakers with academics, charities and industry leaders to explore how we can deliver on the promise of a more regionally balanced, dynamic economy post-coronavirus. And I want to start by thanking our partners for this programme, who have in many ways allowed us to bring together such brilliant people to discuss these vital issues. So first and foremost, BAE Systems, who are kindly supporting today's session, then the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, City Fibre, Avanti West Coast, Power to Change, NHSA and the City of London. And it's been brilliant to bring together such a formidable list of partners to contribute to this vital question. And this morning, to round off that series, we are discussing an issue that goes to the heart of not just levelling up, but also our response to coronavirus, the future of UK manufacturing, and whether we should be encouraging a march of the makers to build resilience and to reduce regional disparities in the coming months and years. Now, why is this important? It's important because we know that the UK has deindustrialised more than any other advanced economy since the 1970s, with manufacturing falling from 27% of GDP in 1970 to under 10% today. The equivalent figures in Germany, just for reference, are a fall of around half as steep, from 34% to 22%. We also know that manufacturing delivers higher levels of productivity and earnings than other sectors. Between 1979 and 2019, output per job grew on average by nearly double as much, 0.64% a quarter compared to 0.36% a quarter in manufacturing compared to other areas of the economy. And we know that some of those higher premiums are even higher in lagging regions, in the places we want to level up. And I'm delighted that Onward will be publishing a big paper on this subject in the coming weeks and months. Moreover, we know that, as every Redwall MP will tell you, manufacturing jobs have historically offered something that more than just economic value. They've also offered social esteem, enduring skills and pride in your community, pride in your place. And the loss of those things has contributed to some of the fraying social fabric and the political volatility of recent years, and particularly in those towns and cities in the North and the Midlands that have dominated the levelling up agenda. So today we'll explore what role manufacturing can play in the recovery from the pandemic, and indeed in the government's efforts to level up growth and opportunity across the country. And if we do envisage a greater role for manufacturing, how do we achieve that? What incentives, what institutions do we need? What lessons from other countries should we learn? And what are the areas of comparative advantage? What specific types of manufacturing should we be focusing on as we embark upon that mission? And to get into those themes, I'm delighted to be joined by an all-star panel who are going to give their remarks before we go into Q&A. So the first speaker is in many ways the man of the moment. It's Nadeem Zahawi MP, who's taken time out of his vital mission to accelerate vaccines deployment to be with us today. Nadeem was appointed as Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State at the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy in 2019. In November last year, he took on an extended brief with the Department for Health and Social Care to oversee the vaccines effort. And he's previously been a Minister for Education and before entering Parliament in 2010 was a very successful businessman founding the data company YouGov. Our second speaker is Jan Godsell. Jan is a Professor of Operations and Supply Chain Strategy at WMG at the University of Warwick, where she leads the Supply Chain Research Group and the Supply Chains in Practice Industrial Collaborator Forum. She has more than 2 decades of experience in industry itself, working for ICI, AstraZeneca and Dyson, and advises government frequently, most recently as a member of the BEIS Supply Chain Resilience Advisory Group and as a member of the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund Advisory Groups for Manufacturing Made Smarter and Driving the Electric Revolution. Then I'm going to turn to Professor Jürgen Meyer. Jürgen is Chair of the Digital Catapult, former Chief Executive of Siemens UK, as well as co-chair of Made Smarter and vice chair of the Northern Powerhouse Partnership. He advises tech startups and scale-up businesses related to the green fourth industrial revolution, and was CEO of Siemens UK from 2014 to 2019 on the back of a more than 30-year career at that company. And finally, last but not least, I'm going to turn to Ian Muldowney. Ian is Chief Operating Officer and Engineering Director for BAE Systems Air. He's worked for BAE in the UK, South Africa, Saudi Arabia, and elsewhere, and was and originally joined, I should say, BAE as an apprentice in October 1995, and has held a variety of positions in the company in the time since. So in a moment, I'm going to shut up, but just very quickly before I do, how this will work is I'm going to ask each of the speakers to give 5 to 10 minutes of remarks before I open up the floor to questions from you, from the audience. Please submit your questions using the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen throughout the session, because I will be promptly finishing this session at 12:15 to protect the diaries of all of our speakers and ensure that they can get on to other important matters in their diaries. So without further ado, I'm delighted to hand over to Nadeem Zahawi. Nadeem.
Thank you so much, Will. And I am equally delighted to have been invited to speak at Onward, especially as we continue to vaccinate at scale and pace, and that we're beginning to see within sight the end of the pandemic. And we can talk a bit more about that later. The end of the pandemic, in my view, I think will give us a really exciting opportunity to really do deliver on that Build Back Better slogan. And again, part of that is if you look at what we had to do on PPE, where when we entered this pandemic, we could only produce about 2% of our PPE requirement in the United Kingdom. We brought in Lord Dayton. We now manufacture over 70% profitably, good manufacturing facilities, and of course supply our needs and deliver that resilience. And we've done similar things in the vaccine program, again, that I can talk about maybe in the Q&A. We are essentially, every strand of every meeting I sit in, there is always this one line that unites the sort of the mission that the Prime Minister set us, which is to bring the four nations closer together, as we did with the vaccination program, and of course levelling up all parts of the United Kingdom. We know that while talent and genius are uniformly distributed in our country, opportunity has not been. So the mission means creating new job opportunities, very much around that sort of upskilling, reskilling, the sort of the lifetime opportunity to be able to take advantage of the education system, to be able to improve your outcomes as an individual, as a family. And of course, the byproduct of that is growing productivity, as you refer to, Will, in places that have experienced economic and industrial decline. Now, of course, during the pandemic, we have seen some of, I think, the best of the sort of the DNA of British manufacturing sector. I was responsible for the ventilator challenge, and having Airbus and Ford and McLaren come together, set sort of manufacturing or business rivalries aside, in the auto sector, for example, to produce those 30,000 ventilators by looking at what capability we had at Smiths and at another smaller business in Oxfordshire and scaling it up, was phenomenal. And it played a vital role in the fight against COVID. I mentioned the 2% of PPE. We've now been able to secure roughly 28 billion items of PPE, including, of course, face masks, visors, gowns and aprons, by that sort of working with the manufacturing sector in the UK. I think it's important, therefore, that sector gets the support it deserves. And I think it's really important we learn from the sector deals that have worked, whether it's life sciences or others, and see if we can replicate it in other sectors. Chemical sector, if you map the chemical industry in the UK, and if you look at, say, a company like Synthema, which produces the bulk of the surgical gloves that are used globally for the whole planet, are manufactured by Synthema. They map out, in a way, very elegantly to what you described, or the media described, as the red wall seats And so I think we can learn from that. And I'm really proud that so far, industry has really benefited from at least £2 billion in government-backed finance in the coronavirus business interruption loan schemes, the C-bills and CL bills, and 2.3 billion through the bounce back loan schemes to help those firms sort of get back on their feet. As they begin to recover, eligible businesses will also be able to apply for the recovery loan scheme, as the Chancellor has seen that transition being necessary. And of course, in addition to that, just shy of 5 billion, I think it's 4.78 billion of support has been provided through the job retention scheme, which has been extended now all the way to the end of, well, not quite the end, but September of this year, to protect wages and, of course, manufacturing jobs across the UK. In terms of business productivity and the review announced a further package, I think just shy of 40 million, I think it was 36 million of support to set out the sort of steps that we will take to boost productivity, very much focusing around leadership. I remember years ago actually speaking at one of your events around leadership and management skills, where far too many firms in the UK either find that challenging or sell out too early to whether it's US or other companies. And it's something that we are very much focused on in terms of that leadership and management skills. Technology adoption and external support. Those are the sort of measures which will be sort of practical, helpful, enabling measures for businesses to sort of respond and recover from the impact of the pandemic. Through the Business Basics program, we're looking at new ways and sort of testing of encouraging small and medium-sized businesses, the backbone of the economy, including those in the manufacturing sector, to sort of adopt and try and, to adopt tried and tested technologies and management practices that can boost productivity. We've obviously gone further with a further investment. I think, again, it was just under 170 million, 167 million to help manufacturers adopt and innovate industrial digital technologies to make firms even more productive. That 147 million investment for the, I know Jürgen is here, and he and I agree on lots of things. We slightly disagreed on Brexit, but his leadership around the Made Smarter strategy was phenomenal, and I was a big fan of it when I entered Bays, and continued to be, and it's great to see it being extended to the Manufacturing Made Smarter Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund Program, which also aims to sort of take all the great learnings from those Made Smarter pilots and further scale them up, because the challenge has always been in government is that scaling up. We don't have the stamina for projects, partly forced upon us by the political cycle, partly because you get sort of 3-year budgets for these things, and then someone says, well, actually, we need to sort of make savings somewhere, but nobody sort of goes, actually, you know what? Some programs just need a bit longer. I would never forget, we launched a product at YouGov called Brand Index. If after 3 years you'd looked at the economics of it, you would have probably cut it. After 5 years, it was phenomenal. It's now one of the largest products in the business, is my understanding. But you need that stamina sometimes in government. Our exit from the EU also, I think, presents a number of new tools to drive growth in manufacturing and economic development, where obviously negotiating a number of free trade deals with the fastest growing, most dynamic economies in the world, which I think the byproduct of that will be that we can produce goods which will be open up new markets for us. Whether it's Houston or Hanoi, I think more businesses will now be able to sell their products around the world much more easily, and of course to our European neighbours as well. However, it is clear that innovation will have to play a really significant role in reinvigorating manufacturing. This is why I think part of our driver that we've announced the establishment of the Hearty National Centre for Digital Innovation. It's a partnership between Science and Technology Facilities Council and IBM. It's really sort of bringing together world-leading expertise in AI and quantum computing to support the application of the next set of technologies that will be transformational in industry, and the practical application of things like quantum computing include optimizing complex logistical challenges such as pick and pack. I was talking to an engineer on the weekend who's working on Amazon's latest warehouse operation in, I think it was Leeds. He's saying where the technology there is just another leap forward in terms of that capability for that large scale warehousing. So we've got to look at some sort of almost new non-traditional areas of growth in terms of those jobs that you talk about in the Red Wall Seeds. Traditionally, many people have seen decarbonisation as a threat to manufacturing, increasing costs and regulation. I see it very much as an opportunity. I think if we put our mind to it, the green industrial revolution can be very real and very sustainable, and actually is a growth opportunity globally, because as we demonstrate to the world, as we've done in offshore wind, what we can do, then we can look at, I know there are a number of opportunities, say, around the service sector. As we did with the oil and gas industry, we built some very large scale service sector industries around North Sea oil and gas economy that became global businesses. I think there's a similar opportunity in green growth as well. And then, of course, the support for British industry, including manufacturing, in lowering costs and remaining competitive and protecting jobs. People tell me you can't onshore PPE, for example. Well, we did it, and we did it at scale, and it remains profitable. This sort of perception that we can't compete with the labour costs in other economies, I think is simply no longer holds true. In April, back to life sciences, I was really proud that we announced a small amount of support, it's £20 million, but actually it has a real scaling link to it around expanding manufacturing in the UK. And watch this space. We've got a whole list of companies. I'll talk more about it hopefully in the Q&A as to why it's happened in the UK post-pandemic, or as people have seen our capability in deploying, for example, vaccines at such scale for the UK. So there's real opportunity there. And of course, whilst many of the manufacturing jobs, certainly in life sciences, 66% of them, people's perception is very much it's sort of London-centric and southeast. Actually, if you look at what we're doing with Fujifilm in the northeast, with Novavax, which is one of our real exciting vaccines that will come through, 66% of life science jobs are outside of London and the southeast. So it's an opportunity again to really level up for the whole of England, Northern Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. And if the vaccine rollout, I'm going to end on this point, Will, has taught me anything, it is that the UK can achieve whatever the British people set their minds to, whether it's 70 million doses nearly now in 6 months administered, or a high-tech, high-wage, low-cost manufacturing sector that will be competitive in the 21st century. I think it is absolutely achievable for us. So I'm a big buyer of UK manufacturing.
Well, what a fantastic way to begin the session, and a really optimistic set of remarks. So thank you so much, Nadeem, and lots in what you just said that I'd like to pick up on in the Q&A. But before we get to that, I'm going to now turn to Professor Janet Godsell. So Janet, I hand over to you, and I think you're presenting a couple of slides. So hopefully the technology will work. And we did test it beforehand, and there you go, fantastic. You're on mute, Janet, just so you know.
Brilliant. Good morning, everybody. I think this is a great opportunity to think about how we can make it big. When I left school, when I was at school at age 15, all I knew was that I wanted to work in UK manufacturing. And at the time, it was pretty much fueled also by the success of manufacturing in Japan. And I was very fortunate to spend time in Japan and actually study there and work with some Japanese companies to really understand some of those things that underpinned it. So I think there's 3 things building on what the Minister said that we should consider. first and foremost, what should we manufacture and where? What critical infrastructure is required to support that? And then actually how we can design for a more circular economy. So just building on the first of these things, I hear lots talked about that actually now in part of going big, we should be reshoring. I would just urge us to be a little bit careful about the use of the word reshoring, because the reality is if stuff's already gone offshore, we're very, very unlikely to bring that stuff directly back. What we're much more likely to do is to consider making new decisions about what we're going to make in the UK. And that's a far more important thing to focus on. The other thing you have to bear in mind is we are part of a global network of supply chains. And actually what we want to do is maximise the contribution that UK pays to that network. And actually it has to make sense to put manufacturing assets in the UK. And what we want to do is to make the UK the most attractive place to put those assets, because it makes sense to do so. And traditionally, that was because we would think about the dimensions around cost, quality and time. And really and truly, what we need to do is make in the UK where it creates competitive advantage. And this could be because it does meet a competitive priority, cost, quality or time. But increasingly, it could be because it increases our supply chain resilience. And fundamentally, we need to ensure going forward that those products and services that are critical to life, not just those products and services that are critical to the economy, but the ones that are absolutely critical to life, that we actually have resilience in the domestic production within the UK. And that is possibly an area where we may need some support. We also need to think about where organisations can really leverage their made in the UK credentials rather than just designed in the UK. But also, as we move into perhaps our next stage of this green revolution, we are seeing lots of new technologies emerge, such as, I think we mentioned wind, there's things like carbon capture, hydrogen. But actually, these new technologies provide an opportunity to anchor the manufacture, not just the assembly of the final products, but the supply base that supports that manufacture within the UK. And last but not least, perhaps if we do want to use a shoring word, the word that we should be using is green shoring, because actually the UK at the moment is the largest net importer of global emissions in the world. As we have offshored our manufacture, we've also offshored our carbon. And as we start to build carbon into the cost of production, but also just the cost of consumption, we'll actually begin to see that it makes much more sense to produce in the UK. The second point, you'd argue, is about infrastructure. And it's really, really important. Actually, at the moment, we've seen a large number of UK manufacturers, their order books have gone through the roof. And that's because the Chinese are massively investing in their 5G infrastructure and also their low carbon infrastructure. If we want to be at the forefront of the future of manufacturing, we need to have an infrastructure that's future fit. And that needs to be an infrastructure that enables our manufacturing organisations to be connected, but also to have access to low cost, low carbon energy. Because really, if we want to truly social level, we shouldn't be thinking about regions in the UK. We should be thinking of the UK as one single factory. Because traditional manufacturing essentially looks at individual organisations owning factories that have traditionally competed on economies of scale with relatively standard products, large batch sizes, with assets that are quite centralised. They're not connected with each other. They don't necessarily have an integrated power source, and actually it can often be carbon intensive. They've forgotten about logistics. It's sort of something that's a different activity. And the driver has been very much one around profit maximisation. And all we've really considered is a very linear economy where we take waste and dump. And actually our consumers don't consider the social or environmental impact of what they're buying. Imagine a future where actually we compete machine to machine, because those machines are connected together through our very good 5G and other connected networks. We compete through economies of scope. So we don't talk about sectors anymore. We talk about manufacturing capabilities that can be repurposed for whatever we need them to be repurposed for, whether that's ventilators or PPE. It's not a question of having to have a big initiative to reconfigure those supply chains. They can automatically reconfigure. And that's because what we've created is this distributed manufacturing network across the whole UK, which is highly connected. It's supported by an integrated and low carbon infrastructure, has high degree of integration with logistics, and actually it's driven by a principle of responsible consumption, that we're not buying or using anything that we don't actually need. And actually it's very much underpinned by the principles of a more circular economy with high visibility of our social and environmental impact. And in order to do this, we actually have to start now. We actually have to start designing our supply chains for a more circular economy. We can no longer think about manufacturing in this take, waste, dump type of approach. If we're going to really decouple consumption from production, we have to think about how do we maintain things, how do we reuse and redistribute them, how do we refurbish and remanufacture, and how do we recycle? Because if we think like that, look at all those new jobs we can create, and look at the way that we can totally rethink the nature of UK manufacturing. Because fundamentally, if you think about our previous industrial revolutions, they were all actually powered by an energy source, whether that be water, whether that be coal, and they were things and resources we actually had in the UK. We can pivot to wind, a resource that we have, or solar, but you just think about all of the materials we currently have in circulation in the UK now, that if we could be really smart and find a way to mine those materials, we could actually be much more resource self-sufficient than we could ever consider. So I don't know if any of you have watched the film The Matrix, but in the film The Matrix, there's a very famous scene where Neo is asked to choose a path between the blue pill or the red pill. And the blue pill is essentially considering carrying on in comfortable ignorance. And actually, if we just consider going on the way we are in manufacturing, you're taking the blue pill. I would challenge you all to use this point to make it big, to build back better, and to think about the future of manufacturing. Thank you very, very much.
Jan, thank you so much. That was a masterclass in kind of challenging our thinking, and I love the conception of the red pill or the blue pill at the end of it. I mean, I suspect the other panelists and we all will agree that we want to break out of our comfortable ways of thinking and embrace a new way. But to help us do that, I'm delighted to now turn to Jürgen Meyer. So Jürgen, you've been talking and thinking and doing UK manufacturing for decades. So really thrilled to have you here. I'm very interested to hear what you have to say.
It's an absolute pleasure to be here on, as you say, Will, on a topic that's been a passion of mine, well, all of my career, and very similar to Janet. It was driven from a very young age, when in the mid-70s I came to the UK from originally Austria, but then having lived in Germany as a young guy, and living in Leeds and seeing that industrial decline. And of course the industrial decline was inevitable, certainly in hindsight, but really the not good enough job we did at replacing the old industries with new industries. And I've always been passionate that, as we now go into this next industrial revolution, which we're in this next digital fourth industrial revolution, that we do make sure that we do create prosperity. So where we've got declining industries like traditional car industry, we make sure we do replace it with the new electric and battery vehicles and hydrogen vehicles, hopefully in the future, etc., etc. And that's really what we've got to make a better job of. Now, the good news is that the manufacturing we do have in the UK is broadly excellent. It's highly innovative. As we know, it creates pretty much 2/3 of UK's private sector R&D, and people are recognizing more and more that if we're going to drive innovation, and if we're going to drive R&D, and if we're going to drive productivity, and quite frankly, if we're going to drive prosperity in high-wage jobs, especially in levelling up regions, it just will not be done without scaling more manufacturing. Our target of 2.4% combined R&D, private sector and public sector, will not happen without manufacturing, pretty much by definition, if you look at the statistics. So I think the importance is much more understood now than it was even a decade ago. And there are some other very positive attributes that we have created over, especially that last decade. I think the catapults have been a very successful movement. It's been slow, but these things take time to build. You know, the German Fraunhofer system or the equivalent in Japan, it didn't grow overnight. This took decades. Well, we've been building our catapult network for a decade now. It was great to see that both the review of the government, of the Department of Bays, of the catapults, and the House of Lords review, gave a very glowing report of the role that catapults are now playing in scaling our research into commercial products, which is actually where often in the UK we've not been fast or good enough. So I'm a great champion and supporter of the catapults. Obviously, slight interest as chair of one of them. I also think the innovation strategy that's coming up very shortly. I think it's going to be critical, actually. You know, I think all eyes are on the innovation strategy, and I'll come back on to the importance of that in a moment, because I think this is going to be, you know, really quite a critical moment for us to define the priorities, the focus in terms of where we invest our innovation money going forward. Nadeem, thank you for mentioning Made Smarter and for having been such a champion. And really, I really appreciated our partnership, Nadeem. Nadeem was a great champion when we co-chaired Made Smarter together for, I think it was about a year. And I hope you come back into that role at some point, Nadeem, but we'll leave you on the important tack of vaccines for a while. And then hopefully get your support again on Made Smarter. It's now 175 million that government have invested in that. And this is all about enabling small to medium-sized manufacturers to get help and support in both creating and adopting advanced digital technologies, like, you know, early simple robotics, or it might be just some simple data analytics within a manufacturing operation. And we all know from experience that these are productivity busting technologies, which of course in the end also helps create higher wages for people who work in small to medium-sized manufacturing companies. We also have some other strengths, I think, in the UK. I think we're particularly strong at the sort of the startup, the digital tech end of things. So, you know, actually, I think sometimes our economy, the way it developed, is maybe more suited to the fourth industrial revolution. You know, the German, Japanese sort of massive automation, huge robotic systems. It's something we're not that good at in the UK because it's hugely capital intensive. You know, it does need quite a bit of government stimulus, whereas, you know, this sort of slightly more agile world of smaller robots, little data analytic systems, you know, we're quite good at this stuff. And that collaboration between tech startups and between manufacturing companies is great, which is what the digital catapult is all about. So finally, in terms of what I think, you know, needs to be done to make those advantages really come good and to make the next manufacturing revolution big, as per the title of this seminar, is that we really need to scale. And that's the one word that I'll sort of leave our thinking with, actually. And that is in the innovation strategy. You know, we really need to be thinking about the innovation areas that we're going to focus on, create clusters in the leveling up regions. I'm a real fan of creating in regions clusters that are focused and where innovation-driven industries can be or become world leading, whether that's around life sciences, like we see, you know, around Cambridgeshire, around Oxfordshire. I do a lot of work in Greater Manchester, where a lot of the work is around advanced and sustainable materials that can drive better future manufacturing and greener manufacturing. Of course, up in the East Coast, it's about offshore wind technologies, etc., etc. So really creating these scaled clusters. Within that, really scaling the catapults. You know, if I can just put some numbers on that, So in Germany, the Fraunhofers have government money in them of about 2.8 billion euros. Now, I know it's a different scale and they've been at it a lot longer, but our UK catapults receive about 142 million of government funding. So, and I'm not expecting we'll go to 2 billion, but we need a step change in terms of that sort of translational research that we need to do in key areas. So those are the things that we need to do over the next decade to really step these up. There are other key technology areas. Another area I'm particularly passionate about is about 5G technology, and I'm less interested in what 5G does to my mobile phone, although that's very nice as well, but what 5G can do for manufacturing and industrial infrastructure. And again, if you look at what Germany has decided to pump into the research around that, it is 7 billion euros. And at the moment, the UK, we've put about 140 million into that same sort of research. Now, as it happens, our research is really cutting edge and brilliant. But experience tells us that, if somebody's putting 7 billion at it and we're 142 million, even if ours is better, it probably will not be the technology that ultimately scales and becomes the global leader in this space. So they're just two examples that I leave us. But there are many more where we really need to really put some real bold ambition behind the scale. And there is, of course, one, and Nadeem, you'd be surprised if I didn't say this, we do need to scale Made Smarter too. I think we've now got a real proven product, and we need to make sure that goes national now. There's great market demand for it, and I think, a country like ours, it wouldn't be amiss if sort of around about 500 million of public money was going into an initiative like Made Smarter. That's the sort of scale proportionately that you would see in Japan and Germany, and even in countries like France and Italy and Spain, actually, who support their manufacturers sometimes a little bit more than we do in the UK. And then my final point is really, Nadeem already nailed it, which is about leadership. So behind all of this ambition, it's about the public sector coming together with the private sector at national and at local level. A lot of this needs to have national frameworks, but then implemented locally, where people then come together and show leadership and really develop these clusters to create these brilliant new industries of the future. Thank you.
Jürgen, thank you so much. That was brilliant and fantastic to have your experience, but also your forward thinking and kind of long-term strategic views as well. Ian, I'm now thrilled to hand over to you. I'm very interested in the BAE perspective on all of this before we go into Q&A.
Thanks, Will, and it's a real privilege to be here. How do I follow the two professors and the minister in what has been some really enlightening and inspiring challenges and conversation? First and foremost, I'm an outcome of the social value from the manufacturing industry. Having started at BAE Systems nearly 26 years ago as an apprentice, the manufacturing industry has helped me develop skills. It's helped me develop my education, and ultimately it's helped me develop a set of outcomes that not only provides the UK with economic output, but serves our customers in the UK and our sovereign capability in many countries around the world, which is it's a real privilege and an honour to do that. From a BAE Systems perspective, we are a global defence and security company. We are a worldwide innovator and technology business. We operate across air, both military and civil, maritime, space, cyber, and land environments. We have a huge footprint around the world. We have over 90,000 people. 35,000 of those are in the UK, and predominantly a lot of those people are in the northwest and northern parts of England, and also in Scotland. So when we talk about generating that economic benefit through manufacturing and closely coupled with engineering, science and technology, BAE Systems sees itself as a national champion of driving this forward, working closely with things like the catapults Made Smarter, working closely obviously with government on a number of programs which I'll come on to, allows us to be a real national champion and a real sense making of where manufacturing needs to go and how we sort of bring it to bear. And as the professors said, really go at pace and scale, because the real opportunity is out there for the UK to step forward. The minister reinforced, we've swallowed the red pill, I think, in abundance over the last sort of 16 months with the pandemic. And what we've done is turn the dial up, and I think we should build on that, really move that forward, and really take that energy forward to really scale and go at pace what manufacturing, engineering, science and technology can do to the UK, not just from a UK perspective, but its international presence as well, and its ability to develop the economic benefits of not just the UK, but its partners around the world. In terms of where we are from a BAE Systems point of view, where we see our high-skilled jobs across the manufacturing and engineering aspect is we provide around about £83,000 worth of economic benefit per employee in the UK, which is about 25% greater than the national average. We want to do even more. We want to build on that even more, working closely with government, working closely with academia, working closely with the ecosystem of partners and supply chain across the UK. We think we can do more and drive that. The investment in ongoing investment in skills and R&D through dynamic partnerships that we have, working closely with Professor Myers' ex-organisation Siemens, working closely to really innovate and co-develop things and really go forward in that Industry 4.0 agenda. And I think could really give the UK a step change and outstrip some of our competitors, but also place ourselves as being a key collaborator and partner on a world agenda. In the defence and security industry, we don't do a lot of things ourselves in the UK. We work internationally. We work across collaborations, whether that's on Tornado or Typhoon or the F-35 programme, but we work globally. We operate as BAE Systems in over 80 countries. We have people based in 40 countries around the world, and a lot of that is projected from a UK footprint. And how do we work closely with government, and in particular in our key markets of Australia, United States, UK obviously, but throughout the Middle East and Saudi Arabia and into Southeast Asia. That international agenda has got to be part of what we do from a manufacturing and engineering perspective. And ultimately, people love it. Our regions, our people, our employees love being part of this innovation and technology journey, love being part of providing a sovereign and national outcome. For us, that's one of our key missions. It's working close with the armed forces and security and intelligence services, but it's about giving people that real noble outcome that they can do and produce, whether it's economic, whether it's military, or whether it's sovereign capability. And where I think we are based is not just from a BAE Systems point of view, but from a wider defence and security perspective. And the Tempest programme is a key aspect of this. It's projected to generate over £26 billion over the first 30 years of the programme, just the UK economy. Working closely with Rolls-Royce, MBDA and Leonardo up in Edinburgh, the real high-tech manufacturing industry of the UK can be at the centre point of economic recovery and build back better and really strive for UK being a real powerhouse of innovation, science, technology and manufacturing going forward. In terms of, from a defence industry point of view, the environment's changing. The digital agenda, as Professor Meyer and Professor Godsell mentioned, is really going to be right at the centre of that, and how we design that integrated manufacturing and logistics supply chain around technologies around 5G is absolutely fundamental to what we need to do and how we strive back better. The Internet of Things, big data, AI, the UK's got some real leading technologies in this area, but we've got to scale it. We're going to make it bigger and bolder. And that doesn't mean people like BAE Systems doing it all themselves. It's about working with an ecosystem, it's about working with SMEs, as we do. We have a huge network of academic partnerships with Manchester University, Cranfield, Southampton, a number of other local universities, such as Lancaster and UCLan in our region just around in the Lancashire area. And it's that partnership model that we've got to develop, and that ecosystem of working with government, with national government, local supply chains, national supply chains and international partners is what's going to make us be at that forefront of that next generation agenda and keep on swallowing the red pill, as Janet said. We've also got to challenge the traditional boundaries of where defence and non-defence cooperate? Where's the co-development, the dual-use technology, the dual-use manufacturing capability coming to? How do we look at the aspects of sustainable technology and how do we apply that in defence and security world, and vice versa? Some of the battery technology that we're developing around things like the Tempest programme and a number of other applications is applicable in non-defence and non-aerospace areas, and could be used in home technology, could be used in large industrial complexes. So how do we take that forward? I think my final points are, one thing that we've got to get right is our education system and the skills and the upskilling of doing that, whether that's retraining, whether that's re-equipping, and whether that's making sure that our base education system brings the right people to bear. Having two children of school age, it's really part of one of my personal agenda, is giving them the right skills to be successful going forward. And obviously manufacturing and technology is something I would strive for them to try and forge a career in. How do we share best practice? How do we collaborate with the likes of the catapult centres? How do we collaborate in partnership with government better and understand how we do that? And obviously, how do we narrow the gap between that traditional research and development into actual sustainable manufacturing? Sometimes I think the UK misses that point, and we've got to get better at that. It goes back to that collaboration and doing things at pace. And ultimately seeing sustainability and net zero as an opportunity, not a risk. I would echo that, and everyone's mentioned this on this call. For me, I'm a child of the manufacturing industry, and I absolutely love it. And it's been a great privilege to speak to you today. Thank you.
Ian, thank you so much. And can I just before I kind of try and sum up and kick off the Q&A, can I just say how wonderful it is to have three speakers who have talked about their own personal experience in manufacturing with such passion and kind of clear love for the UK's tradition of making things and the opportunities that it's given all of you. I think it sets up this discussion brilliantly, and it's also just a very inspiring thing for a session like this. So we've talked about a lot today, and there are some real common themes coming through, including questions about kind of right shoring and resilience, questions about how we can use new technologies to anchor new supply chains and drive out an industrial or manufacturing renaissance in this country. Also big questions about institutions, about scale, about leadership, and about the infrastructure that needs to sit alongside some of this activity. So I'm not going to try and sum up everything you've said, but just there are kind of some really key themes coming through that I hope we can get through in the Q&A. And my first thing that I'd like to get to is something that came up very early on in the Q&A. We've had questions from Sarah Costence-Winterton and Ian McCrudden and a number of others, specifically about manufacturing capability related to the pandemic, so PPE and vaccines in particular. And I'd just like to pose a question to Nadeem and Professor Godsell in particular about what we think the implications of the pandemic are on the UK's own manufacturing capability in those areas in particular. Do we think that the pandemic will lead to a much greater focus on manufacturing those things in the UK itself? And is that temporary or permanent? Do we think we'll do that? And how is the best way for us to approach that? Are there specific areas where we should be doing things here and areas where we might want to be importing different pieces of PPE, for example, or is this just bluntly a new resilience focus for the UK where we will just need to do much more internally? And how can we ensure that the supply chain is competitive and high quality in doing that? So if I can first come to Nadeem for your reflections on that question, and then I'm going to come to Janet. Just given your supply chain expertise, I thought you'd be particularly valuable on that question. Thank you. Nadeem.
Thanks, Will. Thank you, Sarah. I think it's a really important question. And I touched upon sort of the challenge around PPE, where we could, we entered this pandemic where we could only produce about 2% of our PPE needs. And we sort of had an activist, government role in encouraging manufacturers to say, look, come forward. And we had very clear lines of leadership, back to leadership with Paul Dayton, and we've transformed that effort, and it works. I.e., this idea that no, you can't do that is just wrong. And you can in today's world. Back to the points very well made by Janet around once you take into account the carbon cost of consumption of things like PPE. Similarly with diagnostics, we entered this pandemic only capable of doing about 2,000 tests a day. We now, regularly are over 1 million tests a day capacity in the UK. So there's a massive opportunity around diagnostics. But let me just focus on vaccines for a second. So because of the vaccines task force, what Kate Bingham and she brought around her an incredible team. We were very lucky in the sense that most of vaccine manufacturing had left these shores many decades ago. But what we had is Brits who led those vaccines divisions within very large pharma companies, literally drop everything and come and join the effort. Clive Dix, Ian McCubbin, Steve Bagshaw, all names who the history books will recognize as being incredibly important to the vaccine effort. So what did we do? We obviously, and this is the point that I think Janet made so brilliantly, if you look at the supply chain around the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, I think there's something like 182 different components, right? Now, some of them are brilliantly manufactured in the UK. So Croda delivers the lipid, which is the delivery mechanism for the messenger RNA Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, and have done phenomenally well in delivering for Pfizer, and Pfizer being able to increase its production, which was slated to be about 1.2 billion doses in this year, to about over 3 billion doses for this year, which is phenomenal. But what else did we do? We also then said, actually, we need to manufacture in the UK vaccine, hence the investment initially in speed. So we went to Oxford Biomedica and said, look, we're going to commandeer your manufacturing facility for the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. And then we invested in Braintree, in a facility there, again, government investment to grow our vaccine manufacturing, and then partner with a French company called Valneva in Stirling to grow their manufacturing facility, because we thought actually the team audited all the different candidates, and having a whole inactivated virus as a vaccine is another piece of technology in our portfolio of vaccines that will I hope give us that resilience over time. So by making those big manufacturing investments, what we will have by next year, even today, with the investments we've made to date, we will by I reckon first quarter next year, latest second quarter, be able to produce 700 million doses a year in the United Kingdom of any vaccine that we think will work as the virus mutates and it moves from pandemic to endemic, and we deal with it with a sort of annual COVID vaccination program, the way we deal with flu annual vaccination programs. But we've gone further, and where is the opportunity? And this is really exciting. Pre sort of pandemic, most of the pharma industry were really nervous around Brexit, around the regulatory landscape in the UK, because the MHRA clearly is much smaller than the EMA, the European regulator. And so there's lots of concern from the industry. Pandemic comes along, and the MHRA has proven itself to be unbelievably agile and capable to not only approve vaccines, but also medical tech. Whether it's a tiny piece of kit that was made by McLaren or Mercedes that saved many people from being fully intubated, tens of thousands of lives saved, or the vaccines. We were the first country to regulate the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, hence why we got those early doses into the UK. 500,000 volunteers for clinical trials because of what Kate Bingham put in place. A phenomenal asset for the capability to develop clinical trials at speed in the UK at a fraction of the cost that you would have to conduct them in the US, for example. And of course, our NHS, the largest integrated healthcare system in the world. The Canadians are probably second to us, but smaller than us. So a number of companies are now queuing up saying, actually, you know what? We want to talk to you about manufacturing in the UK. Now, the other bit of that, which is, I think, important, and you sort of have to be entrepreneurial, even in government, is the new technologies that are emerging, whether it's messenger RNA or plant-based vaccines, right? Messenger RNA has already proven itself. So, Moderna and BioNTech raised money on the back of actually producing cancer drugs, cancer treatments out of messenger RNA. COVID comes along, they repivot their business, focus on COVID, and have done phenomenally well. So messenger RNA is going to be a big play globally. And we had a really big, long strategic view that we need to land a messenger RNA in the UK, which is why we announced a deal with CureVac. We're talking to other companies as well about messenger RNA capability, manufacturing capability in the UK. And so, just like probably, I wasn't around then, but the Second World War, necessity is the sort of mother of innovation and invention. We're seeing the sort of the byproduct. You're going to see incredible development in messenger RNA, self-amplifying messenger RNA for treatments for cancers, rare disease, and so on. That will be in the UK because of what we've been able to do through the sort of dire straits we found ourselves in because of this pandemic.
Minister, thank you so much. Janet, can I now come to you? And I'm going to pose the question that's just come in on the Q&A, actually, which kind of sums up a lot of this question, which is, are we going to move from a situation where the consumer was king, where we source globally as cheaply as possible, and are we going to move to one where UK-based suppliers are more valued and where we appreciate the internal resilience to global supply chain shocks, or indeed for kind of necessity in things like vaccines is increasingly important? Do you see that shift taking place?
So I'm going to start by asking everyone here a really honest question. How many of you walk down a supermarket aisle and actually buy the fair trade coffee? It might be a tiny bit more expensive, but it's fair trade. The reality is, as UK consumers, and actually we sometimes assume that if something is fair and responsible, it costs more. But actually, you just need to look at some of our group supermarket retailers. If you look at the likes of Aldi or Lidl, they get their costs down, not by inferior product. Many of their products, not perhaps in the Isle of Wonder, but their food products are actually produced in the UK. They support local UK supply chains, but they get the costs down by supply chain efficiencies and through their business model. So I think the opportunity comes into these new circular business models where we can actually think about a different way of getting what we need, and we decouple consumption from production. Because fundamentally, you need those situations where there's a win-win-win. And let's be honest, in the UK, we do have a social divide. And what we want is to make sure that being able to buy responsibly is a choice for everybody, not just a choice of those that are perhaps economically better off. And actually, supply chain design is at the core of that. We're not quite there yet. The minister's quite right. People pivoted really quickly to produce PPE. But having done a study in the Midlands region, there is some disappointment in the Midlands whereby where they were a favoured source of supply at the start of the pandemic, people have quickly moved away to sourcing that PPE from China again, because actually cost has become the dominant driver. And so actually we do need to do more to actually make the social and environmental costs more visible, to actually start to try to change, to drive that consumer change. And it does happen, when there was all the bad publicity around Starbucks not paying tax, people did begin to vote with their feet. So we have to be honest about human behaviour and we have to think about consumption and production. It has inextricably been what's driven every single one of our industrial revolutions. And if we want to drive a green revolution, we have to think about changing consumption and then making the UK the best we possibly can at producing it. And we can't compete just on forward-facing manufacturing processes. And think about PPE, it's great, we need it, but most of it is single use and gets thrown into their landfill. How could we actually be at the forefront of creating a different type of PPE that could be recycled or remanufactured and actually would absolutely demand UK-based manufacture?
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Janet. So Jürgen, I'm going to come to you in a second. I'm conscious of time, so I'm just going to try and pose another question that's come up, because we've got so many questions and they're all fantastic. So thank you everyone who's putting questions in the Q&A. We've got a question from Malcolm Harbour, CBE, who's asked, he's picked up the ventilation challenge as a great example of how the public sector as a customer can boost innovative manufacturing. And he's asked that he suggested the proposed reforms to public procurement rules haven't yet put innovation at their heart. How can we best integrate procurement into innovation policy in order to drive innovative high value manufacturing in the UK? And so I was going to pose that question to Jürgen first and then to Ian, if that's all right, because you've both got very particular perspectives, I think, on this question. And feel free to come back on the earlier question too, if you wanted to, Jürgen. Well,
actually, it totally links, and that was going to be my sort of response to that previous question. So, you know, I totally agree, and I think there will be a trend for more local procurement. But the way not to do it is to just give preference of procurement contracts to local companies. We've sort of been there and tried that, and actually we know that that stifles innovation. So the way that you really have to do it is exactly with what this question is saying, which is to really incentivize innovation. And I mean, if I can just give one quick example, and actually it links to the question of the steel industry, which is another question that's in the chat. When at Siemens we were looking to buy steel, you know, in spades, I mean, tons and tons and tons of it, to go in the towers out into the North Sea. We were keen that we wanted that to be British steel, but in the end it had to be an open tender. And it was clear quite quickly that the technology to produce that steel was aging, old and not good enough in the UK. So the steel plants we had in the UK by the main steel company at the time, I won't say any names, but there weren't many, you know, they just didn't have the right steel equipment. And therefore now it wasn't a surprise, the sort of steel that we required. And so there should have been a strategic approach where government, Siemens and the steel company comes together and say, what can we do to help stimulate that innovation, that you can get the right machinery, and actually that maybe you can even get ahead of the machinery that we're currently buying this from in China or whatever, so that when it comes to the procurement, you're in a really, really good competitive position to put in the right bid. But that's just one example, and you can apply that to pretty much you know, any industry and any procurement. So yes, totally, really incentivizing innovation to be able to get the best procurement deals.
Thank you very much, Jürgen. Ian, can I bring you in on this question as well? Because, I mean, you're on the other side of lots of procurement programs, and indeed you procure lots yourself from suppliers. How can we use procurement to drive better UK manufacturing capability?
I think Jürgen hit the nail on the head. It's about innovation and fostering innovation and having that early conversation, but also using innovation as a way of getting competition as well, and using that innovation linked with entrepreneurship says, right, we see a long-term future in this, whether it's a piece of technology, whether it's a piece of manufacturing, whether it's as the minister said around, you know, sustainable and sort of resilience of vaccines, but you do it in a way that it is clear, concise, and it's communicated in a way that this is for the long term. Having seen the pitfalls of short-termism that says, right, UK industry, invest in innovation, and then all of a sudden we go and place a contract with an American company or a Chinese company or wherever. We've got to build it. You know, it's going to be a sustainable innovation concept, and I think by doing that, you will get more UK companies stepping up to the mark because they're willing to put the money where the mouth is and sort of co-invest, co-develop in partnership with large organisations such as BAE Systems or Siemens, so through that co-development through the supply chain, or working in partnership with government and all the models that come around it. So I think innovation's got to be at the heart of competition, and it allows you then to do that. But it's about having a long-term view, not a short-term view. I think the UK has had a history of occasionally having very short-term view and misleading itself by calling crying for innovation and turning it into things that are just race to the bottom in terms of cheapest price wins. That's not innovation. A partner approach, a conversation about what this means. Exactly the example that Jürgen used is a key thing. The Made Smarter initiatives and the Catapult initiatives are actually a really good source of innovation. How we scale that up now is the challenge, I think, as a good worked example for maybe people to think about.
Thank you very much, Ian. That's fantastic. And actually that touches on something that I was going to try and bring in as possibly, given time, the last question, although I suspect we could go on for a lot longer. And that's, we've had a number of questions which have touched on this question of kind of long-termism and indeed kind of the institutional structures that need to sit under a revival or kind of acceleration of UK manufacturing. And it seems to me that actually, if you think about all of the great successes in this area over the years, they have been both things that have endured for a long period of time. So they've given stability and kind of clear signals to the market, and also areas where there's quite strong institutional capacity. So AMRC is a kind of classic example of that. Actually, the Vaccines Task Force more recently is a great example of that. There are lots of other examples too. Kind of Warwick Manufacturing Group and all the work that goes on in your neck of the woods, Janet, is another example. So I guess the kind of question that I have, and I'm building on a number of different questions in the Q&A, so I'm not going to name check anyone in particular, but the question I have, how do we take that forward, and how do we deliver the scale and the stability that is necessary in the coming years? Because we've had actually over the last 5 years quite a lot of chopping and changing of industrial policy with 3 different governments. So like that's not a criticism per se, but it is a fact of the last 5 years around industrial policy. So how can we now, with a government that has a big majority, may well be here for several years to come and possibly more than one parliamentary term, how can we create that long-term stability and really drive the scale? Is it just a matter of money, or are there other things that we need to be doing to deliver a manufacturing revival in the UK that can really drive the levelling up agenda? So if I can, we've got about 7 minutes left, I'd like to come to all of you to respond to that, and building on your opening remarks and perhaps kind of concluding this session. And if I could go in reverse order, if that's okay, rather than coming to Ian last every time, I'm going to come to Ian first, then I'm going to come to Jürgen, then I'm going to come to Janet, and then I'll close with the Minister, if that's all right, Nadine. So Ian, you first.
So I think one thing we have to do is move away from everyone has a vote kind of concept, and we have lots of little institutions being formed, to what's the right thing to do to drive the outcomes we need for the UK nation. I think we need to have a proper look at the structures around that. You know, we get involved in different task groups, different organisations, different non-governmental, governmental pieces. Is it the right model? So I think what we have to do is take a good hard look at, have we got the right structures in place that are dynamic enough to foster this innovation, this pace, and this scalability we've been talking about today. My worry is we'll end up fractionating entrepreneurship, fractionating innovation, fractionating budgets, because we have too many people who want a piece of the pie and too many fingers in it. And I think what we have to do is look at that consciously. It says, what's the right thing to do for the United Kingdom and its position as a sovereign nation, but also its place in an international agenda. And I think we've got some really good ones. Some of them, we're Made Smarter, the catapults are some really good examples of that. The Vaccine Task Force it's a real good model. So how do we build on that, but also how do we shut down ones that are just not driving the right outcomes? They just got bums on seats. And that sounds a bit ruthless and a bit harsh, but I think if you're going to take a real innovation entrepreneurship view of this and do this at scale, we can't just keep people taking little chunks away, because that doesn't work. And it also, I think it inhibits the SMEs in academia really stepping to the fore, because they get spread betting all over the place. So I think we've got to really take a good sharp look at how we do that, how we scale at it, and how do we put some real dynamic behaviours behind it. Because I think there's a real opportunity here. The danger is we surround it in process and overburden some structure that allows it, we'll just fail if we're not careful.
Thank you very much, Ian. Jürgen.
Yeah, when I sort of look at this from an investor point of view, and we're developing new markets, there's always three things that I look at. And one is demand. Is there demand being generated in the market? The second is the policy, the regulation, the tax framework right and supportive? And the third is the scale to help me drive the innovation. And if I can just use two very quick examples, offshore wind example one, I think we got the policy, regulation, tax and demand bit really, really well. We nailed it. Between private sector, Siemens was key in that, and government, and we created the biggest market in the world. Why wouldn't you invest? The one area where we could still do a lot more is on scale of innovation. I mean, we haven't done badly actually, but we could do more because we still don't have enough local value add. And I totally take Janet's earlier point. We don't want to reshore loads of stuff from Germany and Denmark. We want to be thinking about what are the turbines going to be in 10 years time and innovate those today so that they're made here and not somewhere else. If I take another market, electric vehicles, quite an interesting one. I think we got the policy and the regulation and tax framework we're getting roughly right, and certainly Britain has taken a lead in making sure that there's going to be a transition by saying no more diesel, no more petrol vehicles. So that's there. The demand we haven't quite got right yet. You know, we need more support for sort of scrappage schemes, for incentives. As a matter of fact, we just, on a policy point, we just reversed one of the incentives for buying electric vehicles. So that isn't quite in sync. And then the space where we're wholly inadequate, sorry, Nadeem, is on the scale and innovation that we're throwing in. You know, we just haven't thrown enough money at creating the drivetrains. I know a lot of the talk is about the batteries and all the rest of it. What am I saying in a nutshell? These three things have got to work in tandem. We do a lot of it quite well. The one thing that we generally don't do very well is scale, that's where I started.
Fantastic. Well, that's brilliant circularity, Jürgen. So Janet, penultimate remarks from you. Very
quickly, first of all, state aid. You mentioned steel. In the UK government in 2019, 0.34% of GDP, state aid. France, 0.79%, twice as much. Germany, 1.45%. We are very risk averse with things like that. Secondly, we need to get the stock market to value companies in a different way. They need to look at things like throughput graphs, and not just look at short-term financial measures. And perhaps we actually have to create something like a supply chain responsibility index so that we actually drive change at the corporate level. And last but not least, we perhaps need to start thinking about manufacturing capabilities, not sectors. If we can have a distributed manufacturing network, it's about the capabilities people have to make anything, not what sectors they serve.
Janet, thank you very much. And actually, those figures about state aid, the Prime Minister himself quoted in his Greenwich trade speech last January. So they are very well known at the top of government. Nadeem, last but not least.
Thank you. I said a couple of things. One is we are increasing our spend on research and innovation. The largest part of the spend at BEIS is UKRI and innovation. And of course, you know, it's no secret that we are being incredibly ambitious to go from 11 billion to 22 billion across government in terms of innovation. The challenge is, you know, we're good at the R, we're much less good at the D. And it links back to Malcolm's very good question around how does government then support that innovation by being a customer? Because I think that's where he was coming from on that. Now, there is I think, good news in the sense that if you look at the success, whether it's the Vaccines Task Force or WMG or AMRC, it's leadership and people, right? If you've got good leaders, good ministers that can join the dots, then you make a real difference. And for the first time, certainly in my time in government, we now have Jerry Grimstone, who not only sits in BEIS, but sits in DIT and the Office for Investment in number 10. Which is a great link up, because then you can look at sectors, whether it be steel, auto, life sciences, chemicals, and take a sort of proper strategic look and say, okay, if this sector is, you know, important to the UK economy, whether for strategic reasons or for growth opportunities, then what are we doing to invest in that sector at a sort of strategic level, and then go down to the actual deals that you want to do or put in place and prioritize. So actually, a piece of innovation inside government is we now have actually a minister that is able to sit in both departments and have the decision-making capacity to be able to do that. So that, I think, is a good thing, which gives us half a chance to be able to deliver on £640 billion commitment of infrastructure spend. It's those sort of things that the challenge for any government is between the headline and then delivery. And I think you need that leadership, which is so important. So I'm going to finish on that point, which is you need really solid leadership. And in Jerry Grimstone, you've got someone who understands industry, business, and of course now is very much embedded in effectively two departments and the sort of the central power of Number 10.
Well, that's a great endorsement of the institutional approach and the importance of institutions to all of this. Thank you all so much for such fulsome and thoughtful remarks. It's been, genuinely a pleasure to chair this event, and I've learned a huge amount. I'm sure everyone listening in has also done so. Just before I close, I'm not going to try and sum up everything, because we will be producing a document summarising this discussion and taking forward some of the kind of recommendations and proposals from this discussion, and all of the other events in our Level Up series that's been going for the last few months. And we will be publishing that, I hope before the summer, but if not, at the very beginning of September, to inform the Levelling Up white paper and all of the work going on in government around this theme. So this session is not only a fantastic event in and of itself, but it will be contributing to the ongoing kind of intellectual capital at government's disposal. So thank you all so much for giving up your time. Thank you to everyone who tuned in at home, and thank you to all of the partners on the programme, especially to BAE for helping to put it on. It is genuinely fantastic and exactly what we hope to do at Onward, bringing together different people in the debate to contribute meaningful ideas. So thank you all very much. I'm not going to take up any more of your time. We're already overrunning, but thank you, and see you all very soon.